Many old people slowly begin to feel safer around familiar faces, not because they dislike meeting new people, not because they hate change, but because aging changes the way emotional comfort works inside the human mind. A young person can walk into a crowded room full of strangers and quickly adapt. They talk easily, they adjust fast. Their brain enjoys stimulation, novelty, and movement. But old age changes emotional priorities. As people grow older, the brain slowly begins valuing emotional safety more than excitement. This is why many older people become happier sitting beside people they already know deeply. A familiar face feels emotionally predictable, and emotional predictability creates calm inside the aging mind. An old man may sit quietly beside the same friend he has known for 40 years. Very few words may be spoken, yet emotionally he feels peaceful, because comfort is no longer created only through conversation. It is created through emotional familiarity. The brain relaxes around what feels known. Psychologists often explain that aging increases emotional sensitivity. Older adults become more aware of emotional energy, tone, tension, and behavior. This makes unfamiliar situations feel mentally tiring sometimes. A loud room full of strangers can quietly exhaust an older person even if they smile politely on the outside. But one familiar voice can immediately calm them. One familiar laugh, one familiar habit, one familiar way of speaking. These small things become emotionally powerful with age. Many younger people misunderstand this behavior. They think older adults become antisocial, or stubborn, or emotionally dependent. But the deeper truth is psychological. Aging changes how the brain handles trust. Older people have already experienced disappointment many times in life. Broken friendships, distance from family, false promises, loss. So over time, the mind becomes careful. Trust no longer happens quickly. That is why familiar people become emotionally valuable. A familiar face carries history, memories, shared experiences, emotional proof. An old woman may feel happier talking to the same neighbor every morning than attending a large social event full of new people. Not because her world became small, but because emotional depth now matters more than social quantity. This is one of the biggest psychological changes in aging. Young people often chase more connections. Older people often chase more meaningful connections. And meaningful connections usually grow through familiarity. An older person feels deeply comforted by people who remember their stories, their habits, their struggles, their personality. Because aging creates a hidden emotional fear, the fear of becoming invisible. Many old people quietly worry that the world is moving forward without them. Technology changes, culture changes, people become busier. And slowly, many older adults begin feeling emotionally left behind. This is why familiar people become emotionally grounding. A familiar face reminds them they still belong somewhere, that they are still known by someone. An old father may wait all day for a visit from his daughter, even if the visit lasts only 20 minutes. Why? Because familiar faces reactivate emotional identity. Her voice reminds him who he used to be. Her presence reconnects him to family memories, meaning, and emotional belonging. This feeling becomes stronger with age because older adults often lose many emotional anchors over time. Friends pass away, neighbors move, family becomes distant, and each loss quietly changes the emotional world inside the aging mind. Psychologists sometimes notice that old people become emotionally attached to routines too. The same chair, the same teacup, the same walking path, the same store worker. This is connected to the same psychological need. Familiarity creates emotional stability. As the body ages and the future becomes uncertain, familiar people and routines help older adults feel emotionally safe. Aging brings uncertainty into life. Health uncertainty, time uncertainty, emotional uncertainty. And when uncertainty increases, the brain naturally searches for emotional security. That security often comes through familiar faces. There is another painful reason old people feel happier around people they already know. They become tired of pretending. Around strangers, people often perform socially. They explain themselves, adjust themselves, hide parts of themselves. But around familiar people, older adults can finally relax emotionally. They do not need to prove intelligence, success, strength. They can simply exist naturally. An older woman may sit silently beside her sister for hours feeling completely comfortable, because true familiarity removes pressure. This becomes emotionally precious during old age. Many older adults secretly feel emotionally exhausted after social gatherings full of unfamiliar people, not because they dislike humans, because emotional adaptation requires energy, and aging reduces emotional energy reserved slowly. This is why many elderly people prefer smaller circles, smaller conversations, known people, predictable environments. The aging brain often prioritizes peace over stimulation. Familiar faces also reduce loneliness differently than strangers can. A stranger may offer polite conversation, but a familiar person offers emotional continuity. Continuity matters deeply in later life. Older adults begin measuring life through emotional history. Who stayed? Who remembers me? Who truly knows my story? These questions quietly become more important with age. Sometimes an old person becomes emotional after seeing someone they have not met in years, not because of the meeting itself, because that familiar face reconnects them to lost parts of life. Old memories awaken instantly. The human brain strongly connects faces with emotional memory, and aging often strengthens emotional memory connections even more deeply. That is why familiar faces can bring tears, comfort, peace, or warmth within seconds. As people grow older, they slowly begin understanding something very important about human life. Not every connection feels safe. Some people drain the mind, some people create stress, some people make the heart feel restless. But familiar faces often do the opposite. They calm the nervous system. Psychologists explain that the human brain naturally relaxes around emotional predictability, and this becomes even stronger during old age. An older person may become anxious in a room full of strangers without fully understanding why. Their smile may remain polite, their body may sit quietly, but internally, the brain stays alert. The mind begins observing everything carefully. How should I behave? Will they understand me? Do I belong here? Am I saying the wrong thing? This quiet mental pressure becomes tiring with age, but around familiar faces, this pressure disappears. The brain stops defending itself. This is why many old people seem emotionally lighter around lifelong friends, family members, or neighbors they trust. Even silence feels comfortable there. An old man may sit beside an old friend watching television without speaking for long periods, yet emotionally, he feels connected. Because true familiarity does not always need conversation, it creates emotional ease. Younger people often think happiness comes from excitement, large social groups, or constant activity. But aging changes emotional definitions. Many older adults begin finding happiness in emotional safety instead of stimulation. A familiar face says something powerful without words. You are still known. You are still remembered. You do not need to explain yourself here. This feeling becomes deeply healing in old age, especially because many older adults quietly feel misunderstood by the modern world. The world moves faster now. Conversations move faster. Technology moves faster. And many old people begin feeling emotionally disconnected from these changes. That is why familiar people become emotionally grounding. A grandson sitting beside his grandmother while listening carefully may calm her more than an entire crowded social gathering. Because emotional attention matters more than social size. Old age sharpens emotional priorities. Many older adults no longer care about impressing others. They care about feeling emotionally secure. This is also why elderly people sometimes repeat the same names, memories, or stories again and again. The familiar brings comfort. The brain naturally returns toward emotionally safe memories and emotionally safe people. An old woman may repeatedly mention her childhood friend from 50 years ago. A family member may think she is simply being repetitive, but psychologically, her mind is returning toward emotional warmth. Familiar people become emotional anchors in later life. Another reason familiar faces matter so much is because aging increases emotional vulnerability. Younger people recover emotionally faster from awkwardness, rejection, or discomfort. Older adults often feel emotional discomfort more deeply and for longer periods. This is why unfamiliar social situations can quietly feel stressful. An older person may worry about being judged for forgetting words, speaking slowly, moving slowly, repeating themselves. So around strangers, they become careful, but around familiar faces, they feel accepted already. Acceptance creates relaxation, and relaxation creates happiness. Many old people are not searching for excitement anymore. They are searching for emotional rest. This is one reason older adults often prefer returning to the same places repeatedly. The same cafe, the same market, the same park bench, the same barber shop, because familiar places usually contain familiar faces, and familiar faces reduce emotional loneliness. Loneliness in old age is different from loneliness in youth. Young loneliness often feels loud. Old loneliness often feels silent. An older person may spend entire days without meaningful emotional connection, not because nobody exists around them, because emotional closeness becomes rarer with age. Children become busy, friends pass away, conversations become shorter, and slowly, many older adults begin feeling emotionally unseen. That is why even small familiar interactions become deeply meaningful. A shopkeeper remembering their name, a neighbor waving every morning, a relative calling just to check on them. These moments tell the aging heart something important. You still matter. Psychologists often notice that old people become emotionally attached to those who make them feel remembered. Memory and identity are deeply connected. When someone remembers your habits, your favorite stories, your routines, or your personality, the brain feels emotionally validated, especially in old age, because many elderly people quietly fear disappearing emotionally before disappearing physically. This fear is rarely spoken openly, but it lives silently inside many aging hearts. An old father may become extremely happy when his son remembers a small detail from years ago. An old mother may smile all day because someone remembered her favorite food. These moments seem tiny to younger people, but emotionally, they are enormous. Because familiarity creates continuity, and continuity gives older adults emotional stability in a world that increasingly feels temporary. There is also deep psychological pain when familiar faces disappear. The death of lifelong friends affects older adults very deeply. Not only because they lose a person, because they lose someone who carried pieces of their history, someone who remembered old versions of them, someone who understood their life story without explanation. This kind of loss creates a special loneliness, a loneliness younger people often cannot fully understand yet. Because when familiar faces disappear one by one, older adults sometimes begin feeling like entire parts of their identity are disappearing too. As old age continues, many people begin carrying a quiet emotional truth inside them. They no longer want to be surrounded by many people. They only want to feel emotionally close to a few real ones. This change surprises many younger family members. A person who was once social, active, and outgoing may slowly begin preferring smaller gatherings, familiar routines, and quiet moments with known faces. But this is not always sadness. Often, it is emotional evolution. The aging mind slowly becomes more selective about where emotional energy goes. Psychologists explain that older adults naturally begin protecting their emotional peace more carefully. After decades of stress, arguments, disappointments, and emotional pain, many elderly people stop chasing temporary social excitement. Instead, they search for emotional comfort, and comfort usually lives inside familiarity. An old woman may feel deeply peaceful sitting beside her daughter in silence while drinking tea. No entertainment, no loud conversation, no activity, just emotional presence. To younger people, this moment may seem small, but to the aging heart, it can feel deeply fulfilling. Because old age changes what happiness looks like. Happiness becomes softer, quieter, more emotional than physical. This is why familiar faces become emotionally powerful. A familiar face carries emotional memory. And emotional memory becomes extremely important later in life. The human brain stores faces together with feelings, safety, love, trust, comfort. So when an older person sees someone emotionally familiar, the nervous system often relaxes automatically. Breathing softens, tension decreases, the mind feels calmer. This is especially important because aging often increases emotional anxiety quietly. Many older adults worry privately about things they never discuss openly. Health problems, losing independence, memory decline, being a burden, dying alone. These fears sometimes stay hidden behind calm behavior. But familiar people reduce these fears emotionally. An old father may feel physically stronger when his children visit, not because his illness disappeared, because emotional safety affects the body too. Psychology and biology are deeply connected. The human nervous system responds strongly to emotional connection. This is why loneliness can weaken older adults emotionally and physically over time, and why familiar companionship can bring visible emotional life back into them. Many caregivers notice something interesting. An elderly person who seems tired and withdrawn can suddenly become energetic when a loved one arrives. Their eyes brighten, their voice changes, their mood lifts. This happens because familiar emotional connection activates feelings of belonging. Belonging is one of the deepest human needs, and in old age it becomes even more important. Because aging often brings emotional losses one after another. Friends disappear, family grows distant, neighborhoods change, routines break, and slowly, many older adults begin feeling disconnected from the world they once knew. That is why familiar faces feel emotionally healing. They reconnect the aging person to continuity, to identity, to memory, to emotional safety. An older man may repeatedly visit the same local cafe for years, not because the coffee is special, because the people there recognize him. Recognition becomes emotionally valuable in later life. When someone says your name warmly, remembers your habits, or notices your absence, the brain feels emotionally reassured. You still exist here. You still belong somewhere. Many younger people do not realize how deeply older adults need this feeling, because younger life is full of movement, goals, and distraction. But old age slows everything down, and when life slows down, emotional truths become clearer. One of those truths is this: human beings suffer deeply when they feel forgotten. That is why many elderly people secretly become happier around people who have known them for many years. Those people remember their younger self, their struggles, their personality, their history. This creates emotional dignity. An old woman may smile warmly around an old friend because she feels fully seen there, not as an old person, not as someone weak, but as a complete human being with a lifetime of experiences. Familiar people protect this emotional identity. There is another psychological reason old people avoid unfamiliar environments sometimes. The aging brain often struggles more with rapid emotional adaptation. New people require mental adjustment. New conversations require emotional energy. New situations create uncertainty. But familiar people require almost no emotional defense. The brain can rest. That rest becomes precious with age. Some older adults even begin fearing emotional rejection more deeply than before. A cold response, impatience, being ignored. These things hurt more because emotional resilience sometimes weakens with age. This is why familiar people become emotionally safer. There is less fear of humiliation, less fear of misunderstanding, less fear of being unwanted. And perhaps this is why elderly people often become emotional over very simple moments. A familiar hand on the shoulder, a familiar voice calling their name, someone sitting beside them quietly, because beneath the aging body, the emotional heart still longs for closeness exactly the same way it did many years ago, maybe even more. In the later stages of life, many people slowly begin understanding that emotional closeness matters more than almost everything else. Not money, not status, not success, just human warmth. This realization changes old people deeply. That is why familiar faces become such an important part of emotional happiness during aging. A familiar face does not simply remind an old person of another human being. It reminds them of connection, continuity, identity, love, life itself. An old man may look at his lifelong friend and suddenly remember entire decades without speaking a single word about them. Youth, work struggles, family memories, painful times survived together. Familiar people carry emotional history inside them, and emotional history becomes priceless in old age. Because as years pass, many elderly people begin feeling like pieces of their world are disappearing slowly. The streets change, the technology changes, the language changes, the people change, and sometimes older adults quietly feel like strangers inside a modern world that no longer moves at their pace. This creates emotional isolation, not always physical isolation, emotional isolation. A person can sit in a room full of people and still feel disconnected, but one familiar face can instantly reduce that feeling, because familiarity tells the aging brain, you are still part of something. You are still emotionally connected. You are still remembered. This emotional reassurance becomes extremely important later in life. Psychologists often notice that older adults become highly attached to people who make them feel emotionally safe. Not perfect people, safe people, people who speak gently, listen patiently, remember details, treat them with dignity. As people age, emotional harshness becomes harder to tolerate. Loud criticism, cold behavior, dismissive attitudes, these things wound older adults more deeply than many realize. Because aging often softens the emotional system, many old people become emotionally delicate in quiet ways. They may not always show it openly, but internally, they feel things deeply. That is why kindness from familiar people becomes healing. A son sitting beside his father without rushing. A granddaughter listening carefully to repeated stories. A friend calling just to ask how the day went. These moments seem ordinary, but psychologically, they reduce emotional loneliness in powerful ways. Old age often creates long, silent hours, hours filled with thinking, remembering, missing people. And during those quiet hours, familiar faces become emotional light inside the mind. Many older adults repeatedly look at old photographs for this reason. Not because they are trapped in the past, because familiar faces reconnect them to emotional meaning. Every familiar face contains memories attached to it. Love, pain, laughter, belonging. This is why losing familiar people hurts aging adults so deeply. When an old friend dies, the elderly person does not only lose companionship, they lose someone who understood their life story naturally. Someone who remembered old versions of them without explanation. Someone who shared emotional history. This kind of grief becomes very heavy with age, because older adults slowly realize there are fewer and fewer people left who fully remember their journey. That realization creates deep emotional sadness sometimes, and perhaps this is another reason familiar faces bring so much happiness. They protect identity. An old woman may become emotional when someone remembers the way she used to sing while cooking years ago. Why? Because memory makes her feel alive again, seen again, emotionally real again. This need never disappears with age. Even very quiet elderly people still want emotional closeness. They still want to feel valued, needed, loved. The human heart does not stop needing connection simply because the body becomes older. In fact, emotional connection often becomes even more important. Many old people no longer need grand gifts or dramatic experiences. They simply want presence. Someone sitting beside them calmly, someone speaking with warmth, someone treating them like they still matter. This is why familiar faces often become a source of peace during old age. Familiar people reduce emotional fear, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of loneliness. And slowly, around those trusted people, the aging person relaxes emotionally. They laugh more naturally, speak more openly, smile more honestly. Sometimes even their physical pain feels lighter for a while, because emotional comfort affects the body too. Maybe this is the deepest psychological truth behind aging and familiarity. Old people do not become happier around familiar faces simply because those faces are known. They become happier because those faces make them feel emotionally safe in a world that increasingly feels uncertain, safe enough to remember, safe enough to speak, safe enough to feel human again. And perhaps that is what every aging heart quietly hopes for in the end, not to be admired by the world, just to sit beside familiar love and feel at peace.